this building is not called a cathedral because it has a pointed spire or because it's longer and taller than any other monastic building. The word cathedra, which in Latin means chair or in Greek it means seat, is a bishop's throne. It is the seat of a bishop. And here in Norwich, it sits behind the high altar, placed there by the founder Herbert Lussinger, whose tomb lies just a few feet away. Within the cathedral are a number of smaller chapels open for private prayer. St Luke's Chapel forms part of the first phase of the cathedral building and houses a seven-sacrament font from the now lost St Mary in the Marsh Church. In addition, there are delightful stained glass, including the Virgin and Child, dating from the 1460s. But without doubt, the most amazing piece of art treasure is the extremely rare 14th century altarpiece. As more than 90% of English medieval paintings were destroyed at the time of the Reformation, this is a rare survivor from that period. It was rediscovered in 1847 when someone bent under a table and looked up to see that on the underside were these painted panels. When the table was reversed, this astonishing altarpiece came to light. It is composed of 5 panels which represent the death and resurrection of Christ. They show Jesus being beaten, carrying his cross, the crucifixion itself, and the subsequent resurrection and ascension. The colours are extremely vivid, especially the use of red and the unusual use of a greenish blue. In later times, this red became known as Norwich red, as the city dyers made the colour internationally famous in the production of the much sought-after Norwich shawls of the 18th century. St Saviour's Chapel in the far eastern part of the cathedral is the regimental chapel of the Royal Norfolk Regiment and commemorates its fallen from its formation to more recent wars. It contains an outstanding triptyche painted around the beginning of the 15th century by Norwich screen painters. And in the Jesus Chapel, we're able to see the outstanding wall paintings of the wise men visiting the infant Jesus, dating from around 1510, and a rare Norman altar slab.
The nave is undoubtedly striking. Its immense length and height, with the 14 arcaded Romanesque bays displaying a remarkable harmony with the late 15th century Gothic roof. It simply takes your breath away.
And functioning as key stones to hold the roof together are the roof bosses, of which there are over 1,100, the greatest number of any cathedral in the world.
One of the crowning glories of Norwich Cathedral are the roof bosses that you see above you here. There are about 1,100 in here. They are historiated, so they're telling a story. So rather than just being decorated with foliage or something like that, they're actually telling a story. They're telling the story of the Bible. So from the east end of the nave, you can just see it at the end where we can see the edge of the tower above the organ. It starts with God creating the world, and then throughout the whole of the nave going towards the west, it goes through the Old Testament, the New Testament, finishing off with the Last Judgment.
So the bosses tell a story, and they were put up in the mid-15th century when perhaps people didn't read and write. So were they designed to tell the story of the Bible? Is that one of the purposes of them?
It's very likely that that's the purpose, because they are so much a story. What we tend to see in churches today is a lot of bare walls. In the medieval period, there would have been colour and decoration all over. So you get some places where they've used the walls to paint them. And here, those stories that might have been painted onto walls or appeared in windows are actually in the bosses.
In the way some churches have Rudolph screens, we saw one at Binham Priory, which tells stories that the people then have been told by the monks, by the priors, by the priests, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because obviously the ones here in Norwich Cathedral, if you're trying to tell a story, they're so far up, you can't even make them out that well. It's not that easy.
It's not easy at all, which is always one of the questions that people ask when they say, well, if it's supposed to be telling a story for people to read, why are they so high up? Could you actually read them? And nobody's ever really answered that question. One of the suggestions is simply that it's about the fact that the story is told in the building, so the presence of the story. And actually, if you do take the time, the easiest way is to lie on your back on the floor. But you can, if your eyesight's not too bad, you can actually pick out some of the bosses because they're quite big.
Churches in the Middle Ages acquired wealth of silver vessels for celebrating Mass. Each church needed at least one chalice for serving the wine and a paten or a plate for holding the bread. And up a small staircase you can view some of the treasures held here. One of the great treasures for many cathedrals is the organ, and here we have one of the largest pipe organs in the country. David Dunnett has been the organist here for 20 years.
There's been an organ here for many, many centuries, and the first reference to an organist was Adam the organist back in the 14th century. So there was some sort of organ here many, many years ago, and over the centuries organs have been destroyed by fire and been taken down by the Puritans, and the organ that we have now is a rebuild of another organ that was destroyed by the fire. It was originally built in 1899 and partially destroyed in 1938 in a fire during a service. So a very dramatic end to that organ. And then it was grandly rebuilt in the 40s and has been added to a little bit since then, but it's essentially a bit of the 1899 organ, but mostly 1940s. Music that's written for the Anglican liturgy is very much reliant on the organ to support congregational singing and choral singing. Over the centuries, of course, it has been done by bands and by instrumentalists, but the organ has always been fairly central to cathedrals, and the music has been built very much to match the choir and the organ, both in combination and in solo. So it's absolutely essential and crucial to what we do here on a daily basis.
The cloisters were the passageway that linked the different parts of the monastery. The monks would use the cloister to go to the church for worship and prayer, to the chapter house for meetings, to the refectory for meals, to the library to study, and the hostelry to greet visitors. It is the largest surviving monastic cloisters in England, damaged in the 1272 riots, so most of it dates from late 13th to mid-14th century. Along the North Walk there are Elizabethan wall paintings depicting the coats of arms of dignitaries associated with the visit by Queen Elizabeth I in 1578. And at the entrance into the cathedral, the highly impressive Prior's Door, which dates to around 1300. It is a finely carved and decorated arch with thin piers at its side and recesses displaying statues of Christ, John the Baptist, David, and Moses bearing a scroll of 10 Commandments. And like the nave of the church, so the cloister has bosses depicting various biblical characters, and the Green Man. And they are a great deal closer, so you can actually make out the references in the designs. There's been so much that I've not been able to show you. The library, for instance, the painted vault, some of the chapels, the herb garden, more of the historic buildings in the close, the school, the Broderers Guild. There is a great deal to gather on a visit.
My holy trail started here and ends here, some 900 years after the foundation of the Benedictine monastery. Now, of course, the monks long gone, but with their values of worship, learning and hospitality still very much evident in the daily life of this community. Some of the buildings didn't survive time, or reformation, or nature. Others have had new life breathed into them. It's been a hugely interesting and informative journey on this trail, a chance to have a peek back in time at how life might have been in centuries past, to indulge and to learn. A trail that reflects the many twists and turns of life.